My name is Robert Tangway, and been up all night. Can't sleep. And the reason being is I haven't seen my children in almost a year, which is the direct result of the lies of the courts, the mother, her attorney, and their inability to follow the law, in which they've committed fraud in the courts and upheld that fraud all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court won't hear anything. They won't hear my brief. They struck it because they're hiding the fact that domestic violence protection orders are unconstitutional. Article 15, right of the accused. And then when they deny you of your rights in the courts, that's a direct violation of Article 14. Legal remedies to be free without denial and delay. That's New Hampshire constitutions, or I believe it's Fourth Amendment due process and Article 14th Amendment. Regardless, with all that stuff, the courts have abused me, and the mother abused me in conjunction with her boyfriend, possibly still, I don't know. I haven't talked to her, I haven't said a word to her, or communicated in any way since they even hinted at domestic violence. There was no accusations of physical or sexual abuse. The lawyer lied in court, corrected herself, and then the judge wrote down those lies, even though they conflicted with the evidence shown, saying that I looked into a sliding glass window on a date that they had no proof of. And she doesn't have a sliding glass door. She doesn't have that. The lawyer knows about it, wrote it in writing. And then that I initiated 1,100 texts for 3 months straight, while saying in the same pleading and also Supreme Court brief that I averaged 28 texts a day, which 28 times 30, this was in September, 30 days in September, is not 1,100 texts. Further, the texts were reciprocal, back and forth. She never called the police on me. I called the police on her prior to a parenting petition being filed and prior to any claims of domestic violence. And I was denied service by the Manchester police. And I have the recordings and they're online. They said that I need to go to court to have my rights for children, which simply is not true. You have rights to your children, dear, unless they're taken away from you. I rarely cry anymore because my brain's scrambled. Because everything I've known and thought about America, the justice system, people, being a father, being a parent, is gone. It's just gone. It's disappeared. Because if the courts can lie in writing, fraud, things they know are mathematically and physically impossible, and have been told about it, and the lawyer says nothing, even though they have a duty to say so by Supreme Court rule, professional codes of conduct, rules of conduct, and law, their oath that they take. Yet still, what they decided to do was weeks later ask the court, which further shows that they're not afraid of me, to order direct contact, which conflicts directly with the law, 173B. I think it's section 3, it's in writing, and I've informed the court that they have to change the protection order. And that would have been a good time to change the physically and mathematically impossible findings of fact, which, if removed, would show that there was no domestic violence. It would be impossible for them to grant a domestic violence protection order. So they let them stand. Further, after the court was told this by a different judge, who's only ruled in the lawyered party's favor, they asked to hold me in contempt for not violating a protection order, which by law says that unless the final protection order is changed, that I would have to be immediately arrested. And if it happened more than once, it weans its way up to felony charges. So I would be in jail for the next 20 years if I followed it for 1 month. And knowing with all the fraud that existed, is reasonable to say that I can't do that. Well, it's illegal. It would be illegal for me to do that without changing the order. And they've requested it. They've requested that I use what's called our family wizard, which is direct communication between the two parties, one of which requested it, so they have the duty to change the order and ask the court to change the order, but yet still upheld the fraud, which is against the law. And it shows that they weren't in fear. Because again, there was no claims of physical or sexual abuse, because there was none. There was no domestic violence at all. They did it strategically in direct response to my legally filed motion to ask the court to order mediation. Because prior to that, every time we did talk, she would yell and scream at me and not make enough time. That shows that she is contentious, and the contentious parent, and unable to co-parent. By the way, when I called the police on her, it's because what's called 633:4 interference with custody, and it is a felony with no justification when a person hides the location of a child or children, 2 children in this case, very young children, from the parent, and detains them, refuses to give them back. So not only did she commit that felony, in writing, by the way, there was a 30-day record of it, plus text messages where I asked her where she hid the location and knew about it and planned it out, which was submitted to the police, and they did nothing about it. Sorry. They supposedly brought it to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor, the county prosecutor, would not acknowledge that he received that paperwork. And so I filed a complaint against them. And so instead of rectifying the situation, what do? They hired a lawyer on the city of Manchester's dime And that's where we're still at. And then I filed more charges, or attempted to file more charges, more reports. And every time I go to the police now, I get contention. They do not investigate. They do not do anything. They actually delayed and hid and stopped me from filing reports. They told other people to not accept a report from me. So I don't know how I appear right now. If I look like I'm crazy or angry, I don't think so. I think I seem pretty reasonable. You know, I'm a little bit tired because it's, 5 in the morning and I've been up. But I have no place to go. So I wrote New Hampshire all over twist, along with over 100 pleadings to the family courts and Supreme Court. And where it's at currently, right now, is that they moved the trial date because they saw my testimony in the state of New Hampshire. They moved the trial date from 2024, spring of 2024, to the exact dates that the committee comes back online, where there'll be further testimony to retaliate against me. So I have to go to court. It gets even better. I don't have to go to court actually now, according to the court, but the scheduled court dates are September 5th and 12th, which is the day that they're taking testimony at the special committee. What's even crazier is if you look and see the other videos, they held me in default against the law, because this is not the only laws that they broke. Not only were there fraudulent filings of domestic violence and statements made by the judge that are physically, mathematically impossible, and by the lawyer, which she knew and was upheld to this day, but she didn't file accurate financial affidavits, and she never filed a child guidelines worksheet. And the law clearly states, 458C says that the person seeking child support shall, which shall means must, so they must file a child support guidelines worksheet. The judge can't waive that because they can't change the law. Only the legislator can. They must follow the law. It was brought to their attention immediately, along other things. Like he added exclamation points to my written statements and omitted parts of my statements to make me look bad in a narrative, a false narrative. I brought all that up to him. And so he not only held me in contempt for not violating the protection order, which would have sent me to jail, it's called duress, knowing about it, and then still failing to act on it, but he held me into default. And then Family Court Rule 2.6 says that in order to put someone in default, you have to have a default hearing, and they must also file a child guidelines worksheet. I brought this to the child support office, to a lawyer, by the way, Matt Hayes, and in writing, and he checked out the record and saw that they did not indeed file a child guidelines worksheet. So instead he sent me back a letter that says nothing about the law that he saw, and just said that they couldn't rule on that. Now, as a lawyer, you're required by the Supreme Court rules of professional conduct to report any injustices, any violations of law by a judge. He's required to do that, but he has not, at least to my knowledge. He sent me a letter that's saying that, oh well, too bad. Sorry, there's nothing we can do. Go to court. The court says go to the police say go to the court. All the agencies say get a lawyer. Judges say get a lawyer. The police say get a lawyer. They ask you if you have a lawyer. If you don't have a lawyer, they know that you're screwed. You can't do anything. And then I went to, what other group did I go? Oh, Governor Sununu's office. A year ago almost, back in December, immediately, I went to and they won't do it. They say get a lawyer. They won't acknowledge or do anything about it. This is not legal advice. I don't want legal advice. I want you to follow the laws and hold the people accountable to follow the laws and the Constitution, by the way. So again, legal remedies, Article 14, legal remedies must be prompt, complete, and without denial. So, if you go to the police and say, hey, here's a crime, and they deny you any service, that is a violation of the Constitution. And they are not allowed to write laws. Only the legislator can. And they are not allowed to decide whether a person is guilty or not. They have to conduct an investigation and write a report. And they have to conduct an investigation in good faith, not to cover up the crimes committed by a fellow police officer, who was married at the time, by the way. And I talked to his wife, and his wife was upset that they brought the kids over there without telling her. I have that in writing, by the way. And yeah, they basically just did it. They weren't scared in any manner. They did it because they were angry at me, because I did not find it appropriate for them to meet so soon. And by the way, they broke up several times, off and on. And I talked to her quite frequently. I was able to talk to her, and she said that she would never get back to, someone would just leave me in these situations. And so, like, I've already dealt with that. I can't trust her. I don't want to be with her. I want to be with my children, and I want to have a fair shake at life. I want to be able to just consider the facts. Because she's in the house now. House that I paid half of all the bills, half of the mortgage, half of the insurance, half of the taxes for years. This is a third house that we lived in together. The two houses, I paid half of everything. She had the money. But if it was reversed, where a man decided, hey, by the way, I don't want you, I feel like you love me more than I love you, and I want to date. I want to move on. You can't just kick them out and commandeer and say, give me child support, give me all these things. By the way, I have all these assets and all these things. You can't do that legally. It's against the law. Well, it's not a criminal offense, but the law states that assets shall be considered, and that's since 1955. I'll post that. I found that law. And that law has not been repealed. That law applies. It's a special case, and that law applies. And I brought that, not the specific law, up, but I brought that up at the beginning, before domestic violence was filed. Because remember, I filed a motion for mediation, and they immediately went to file a domestic violence civil case. By the way, I just want to be clear that the police were never called on me. I was never arrested. I was never given any due process. The crimes weren't clearly presented against me. 173B, civil protections for domestic violence, are unconstitutional. Further, they were made to protect against violence. I'll show you. I'll put up a screenshot at some point. Some literature that I just got from a domestic violence coalition. it says that it is intended to stop violence. Violence. So, not only is in order to get a protection order, you must prove to the court that the acts were committed, and each act is a crime. So if it's a crime, so you have constitutional protections. They have to do everything. There's bugs biting me. It's great. They have to do everything with due process. You have protection, rights to a lawyer. You don't have to testify against yourself. You have to get charged. They have to fully state the charge. You can't just write up willy-nilly whatever you want and then conduct a hearing. There's arraignment. There's everything. There's all the things that if you were to steal a candy bar that you would get in court. That's what happens. But not with domestic violence. And the reason why, because if you look at the tail end, the end of the domestic violence, which I didn't pay attention until, I don't know, about a month ago, when I'm like, oh, they have a fund. It's for federal money. Money gets funneled into domestic violence protection agencies, which I've called, and they denied me service. They didn't do anything. And then they collect the money. And then not only that, the lawyers get paid. You pay for a lawyer to defend yourself if you have money, and then usually it gets dropped. A lot of those cases get dropped because you have a lawyer, and they're absolutely ridiculous. Because if there was actually domestic violence, all you'd have to do is call the police, say, hey, here's this bruise, I got hit, and by the way, boom, boom, boom. The law states for the civil protections, domestic violence, it's intended to stop violence and abuse. And abuse is violence. It has to, not only is the abuse, okay, the abuse could be harassment, which there was none, but let's just say there was harassment. The other part of it is that you must be in fear of your physical safety. Your physical safety must be at risk of abuse. Domestic violence and sexual abuse. It doesn't say any type of anything. It doesn't say anything about hurt feelings, sad feelings, and certainly when you read the petition that you have to sign, it says that any false allegations can have criminal penalties. You do a sworn statement. And her lawyer wrote that. Her lawyer wrote it. Her lawyer wrote it for her in the third person at some parts. And also saying false things like she was upstairs giving a bath when there's no bathroom upstairs. Impossible. So when I published the hearing, it got taken down magically. She took it down as it was starting to go viral, or whatever it was. People were starting to see it, and it was taken down. And then YouTube was just like, "Oh, we can't explain why. It was just taken down." So they're trying to silence me. How did they get strategic advantage in the courts? Well, because there's other aspects of this. There's the parenting matter and domestic violence, but they both collide. So what the judge did, the different judge for the parenting matter, Judge Previtt, is he held it against me using judicial notice, rules of evidence for impeachment, which I obviously objected to and explained to him, and then requested a hearing. It says that you can impeach someone with the fact that they have been convicted of a crime. That means charged, presented with the crime, due process, afforded a lawyer if they have none, substantially all the elements of the crime are presented against them, and then they're convicted of it. They go through court, a normal court process where they're able to present their full and complete defense, get exculpatory evidence, which means evidence that is in the benefit. So anything that the prosecutor has that's in the benefit of the defense, they have to send it over, the Brady laws, and so on. I'm not an expert, but it's embedded in Americans. We know this. We know what's right and wrong. We know what's against the law. We know what's not against the law. I'm a person who does not break the law. I have a great respect for the law. And I knew the law before even reading it because it all makes sense. It's all common sense. But the thing with domestic violence protection orders is that they were made to get federal grant money and to enrich lawyers and cause contention in family matters, which family matters still aren't settled, by the way, because they used to be property. So every constitutional amendment that you see, when you see property, you see family. Because women and children used to be property. They didn't have the right to vote, and they also didn't have to go to war, and they still don't have to go to war. It's amazing. All the privileges without the responsibilities. I had to register. So there's just so much. It's so overwhelming what they do. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to talk and then maybe catch a couple hours of Z's. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I really don't. I put myself out to every agency, send them facts. I sent out a slew of other things. And there's really, I basically just got dismissed from the Supreme Court yesterday. They did a final mandate. Whenever the court rules, they don't explain anything. They simply say the same thing. There has been no rule or matter of fact misapprehended or overlooked. That's what they say. But they never say what they saw. And that's what the police do. They never say what they saw, at least in my case. First of all, if you go look up my name, Robert Tangway, you will find articles that I wrote in support of the Manchester Police. Manchester Police, hands tied for the homelessness. These were published, by the way, in the Manchester Inkling. I'm a registered and published author. My content's been seen millions of times through videos that I've made. Now this has no views because I've worked on another, and I don't even want to disclose it because I'm afraid of silence that it will be construed as evasion of privacy and more harassment. I'm in fear, literally, of anything that I do, I will go to jail, be removed from my papers, and end up like Victor Luce, who I saw in court just to go sit down. And he was in an orange jumpsuit. And I know part of his story because he told me. It was just a guy that I met at an apartment. He did some work. But anyways, same thing. Same story. Rich family with the woman on the woman's side. They kicked him out, filed domestic violence. Manchester police came after him. They arrested him. I guess he did some stuff that upset them, like he was protesting. I don't know those details, but I do know what I heard in court. And it was with Judge Previtt, by the way. So I wrote that in an affidavit and a motion for financial affidavit, compel financial affidavit documents and such. And what did he do? He kicked it back. He took it, I filed it, and he sent it back. The reason why he did this is because they made orders against both parties, but that all pleadings shall be 5 pages or less, signed with an affidavit and supporting facts pursuant to rule, I think it's 123, Family Court Rule 123. Anyways, so I filed everything I did was that exact way. 5-page pleading. From that point, affidavit, which means signed, notarized, sworn statement, and I'd put in supporting facts because you're supposed to put supporting facts that are in your affidavit that aren't on the record. I did that. He found one of my pleadings frivolous, by the way, he did this himself. The other party didn't ask for it. He did this himself. He did judicial notice himself and dissuaded all my evidence that I submitted. It's just ridiculous. So anyway, so we have that, right? So we have these pleadings, and I filed a motion for contempt of court because she wasn't the opposing party wasn't following, her lawyer wasn't following the court order. She didn't sign 4 or 5, I believe it's 5 total pleadings, motions, and objections were not with affidavit, and none of them contained exhibits to support the facts that were off the record. Now, all these pleadings, by the way, and she did a retaliatory pleading, it's called a replication, which she was ordered not to as well, and the court did nothing about that as well. And then I let them know about it, and they still won't hold her in contempt. Only adverse orders against me, which is against the law. I think it's RSA 490, where they set up the courts, the family division in 2005. It says that the courts are chartered to be fair, non-biased, and to treat all citizens respectfully. That means pro se, people who are self-represented. So the whole point of the matter is that the courts aren't fair. They're holding me to an impending trial. Now, let me tell you what the trial is going to be, because he gave an order. The order is a couple check boxes and like 4 sentences. And basically they're saying that I'm in default, which I filed a motion he hasn't responded to, that I'm in default, and it will be heard on a default basis, where as a courtesy, I will be allowed to attend, but will not be allowed to speak until the end, where I can make a statement. So that means I have to sit for 2 days in court currently, which is illegal and against the court rules, because I'm not in default, because they didn't fill out a child guidelines worksheet, which is a law, and they never had a default hearing, which they're supposed to. I have to sit there and let them, a known liar, sit there and present evidence on offers of proof, and meaning she just gets to say, oh, I'm a lawyer, this is true, this is true, this is true, and I can't cross-examine. It's just basically the same way the domestic violence protection hearing went, which they're not supposed to be heard on offers of proof according to the court rules. And I had a judicial referee, which means she was retired, who was basically senile. She didn't know what was going on. She was mesmerized by text logs. By the way, they didn't submit any texts. They submitted text logs, which proved that I did not initiate 1,100 texts for 3 months. It shows that there was conversations of less than 1,100 texts for three months. So, fraud, basically what they do, it's very simple. You have the Supreme Court, right? The Supreme Court is every part of the court. It's the appellate court, it's the administrative court, means it controls all the judges, and then they also control the Judicial Conduct Committee. So if you have a complaint, and also the lawyers, the Bar Association. So if you have a complaint against a lawyer or the Bar Association, they go to the Supreme Court. If you have anything to do with the trial or hearing that they say you don't like, but the reality is they broke the law, the judges break the law, the lawyers break the law, and basically, if you don't have a lawyer, even though the law and the rules say that pro se individuals are to be treated fairly and equally, they create a record so immense and with so many issues, violations of law, bias, because your only remedy is to go to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, which will require you to file a brief. Now, if you have money for a lawyer, you may get treated reasonably fairly. There's bias anyways, but you won't get totally screwed. But what happens is, typically one party runs out of money, and then they just let the other lawyer trample all over. They can no longer hire legal counsel. Now, also what happens is, if you do have a lawyer and you're a man, you get treated with bias anyways, because the even though it's against the law, they preference the woman, and you'll find that women initiate 70% of all divorces, and who knows what percentage of parenting matters. Unmarried, we were common law married, or by law, 3 years. There's an actual 1945, I believe it is, or 44 statute that's still on the books that basically discusses what's called common law. It's not called common law, but you are considered married if you're believed to be known and are known to be a husband and wife and call yourself husband and wife. However, the Supreme Court has noted that marriage is to rule based on marriage is unconstitutional. Now, it could be some sort of specific, but it hasn't been applied. So the Supreme Court doesn't want to ever hear anything to do with domestic violence. And what they do is they try to find a procedural way to dismiss the domestic violence petition in favor of the woman, the person who is at the appeals court. You will find the numbers, and you will also find, if you look at all their orders, because they release their orders, they use the same template for procedural. They rarely issue any opinion on domestic violence. The only time I've seen an opinion on domestic violence, I've seen two: the Albrecht case, and then also another case. Actually, that was the marital, so there you go. And then there was another case where both parties were unrepresented. So I wasn't represented. However, her attorney was represented and basically just got to continue the fraud. Well, instead of them, and they ruled against me, they made me pay for transcript fees and combined my cases and basically did whatever she said. Now, in the case where the two unrepresented parties, they did issue an opinion. And the people didn't even file a brief or order a transcript, which I ordered a transcript. So what did they do? They went out to all the domestic violence organizations and got 4 amicus curiae briefs, which are friends of the court briefs. They solicited briefs, and then ACLU solicited a brief too. But they went out of their way to ask other people for help, while people like me and all the numerous, like 4 every week, did not preserve the record or present the record properly, and blah, 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 blah. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear novel cases or anything that will destroy their racket, which their racket is domestic violence money, federal grant money into the state, money into lawyers' pockets, because either way, if the more domestic violence petitions, the more people are going to hire lawyers to defend themselves against it. And then now they're starting to increase the amount of lawyers that actually go forward and file for them, which is what happened in my case. The number was 11% of all cases the last time they did a study of represented parties in domestic violence. They want to increase that. So this wasn't like some lady who was beat or accused of being beat or anything. This was a woman who was upset and angry, who wrote an email to me a day before inviting me to my children's soccer, a day before filing the domestic violence petition or notice, and then communicated with me after she filed it, never telling me about it. I found out by getting a pleading or an objection to my motion to order mediation, because I wanted to work this out. I finally figured out, I will go back a little bit, I finally came to the realization that I do not want to be with her, even though I was willing to deal with all the stuff that she did to me afterwards. We had so many great times. I loved her. I still love her in a way, but not like that. I finally moved on. I wanted to go to mediation so that we could discuss in front of people, in hopes that she would not yell and scream at me and hang up the phone or run away. And what does she do? She probably got back with her boyfriend. They were trying to throw anything possible against me. They had this hatred towards me. But let's not forget that they conspired, a police officer, to remove my children from the state. By the way, he's guilty of a felony because he caused them to be removed and hid the location and detained them. He caused them by invitation out of state, and they told me, she emailed me as she was on the way while I was at work. It drove me crazy. I'm not a guy who works like I worked all the time. I was working full time at that point, and even when we broke up. But for over a year, I watched the kids 4 days a week, full time. I taught them, I fed them babies, put them to bed every single night. My youngest, who was 2 at the time when we first broke up, 2 years old. He's a baby, basically. And this poor little kid, they don't know what, he slept on top of me every single night. Every night I put him to bed. Do you know why? Because his mother would breastfeed him, because she was a great mom. Would breastfeed him, but he wouldn't stop. So I ended up taking over that. And let me tell you, man, when I left, this is almost a couple years, but when I first left, I had to move into a ghetto, dangerous studio apartment where people were doing drugs, where I was threatened with violence because they thought I was ratting on them, which I know not to, because I'm not stupid. You just keep your mouth shut and deal with it. I would sit there on the beanbag, the same beanbag that I had both children put to bed on. They would sleep, and I would sit there and have little heart attacks. And if I fall asleep, I'd wake up, and all of a sudden my heart would be pounding. Where's my kids? Where's my kids? Like, don't understand. And all of this is because women know that they get preference in the court, and they simply can just decide to end a family. But that's not the way it really works, because if constitutionally women and children are property, which they're not, and the family unit is an entity or like a business, then the person causing that, and this is actually substantiated by law, they say it's a no-fault state, but there are like 7 faults. One of them's drunkenness, one of them's cheating, infidelity. It's still on the law books. There are causes: abandonment, abuse. If someone breaks up a company and just walks away, they don't get to make all the decisions. That's the way it works. That's the ex ante or the ex post. I get a little confused with that. But basically, the results of letting one party, typically women, get all the goodies because they want to move on and break up a family is not in the best interest of the children, and it's not fair. It's not fair. Constitutionally, legally, morally, common sense wise, it's not fair. And any guy that does it, it's clear. They're paying forever. But in my situation, she was the one who had the assets, and her family had the assets, and they're paying for the lawyer, by the way, written statement, which I always knew. They're paying for the lawyer. And they helped in this whole process because they are from a military family. Well, the father works in defense. The mother hasn't worked in over a decade. And it just sounds better to have a police officer as a husband. By the way, he was in process of divorce, now divorced. Lives below his child. Has a stepson from a previous fling. The mother, we had a planned family. So that's what I'm saying, is that if that person can, people when they go to court, they make all types of arrangements. And that's why I wanted mediation, because our situation was special. I took him around, walked him around the neighborhood every day. Everybody knew me. I was so proud to be a dad. He's got nowhere to go. That's a highway. Anyways, I was an amazing dad. Even here where I live now, I was an amazing dad. People see me throwing football. You don't have the right to just move on. You don't have a right. There is a damage when you decide to break up a family. There is a physical, emotional, mental, and financial damage that is done. It is a tort. If you break up a family just because, there is a damage for that. Now, the New Hampshire law prohibits that from a lawsuit from engagement, which we were engaged, by the way, and known as married. Everybody said that we were married, including our friends, in writing, by the way, your wife. And I submitted that to the court. You can't just move on at the detriment. You can say no more. I don't want any more of you. I don't love you. Love is a choice. Attraction's not. You can say those things and they can be respected, and they were respected. But to break up a family and then commandeer every aspect, every decision making, because it wasn't just taking the kids out of state, it was introducing the kids. And then before that, it was their first sleepover. Didn't ask me, just did it. Just did it. And then when I found out from them that it was going to happen, I said, hey, what's going on? Going to happen anyways. In writing, by the way. In writing. Going to happen anyways. She would not talk to me. And then when she got a lawyer, her lawyer obviously advised her to not talk to me and have everything in writing, so we would never be able to co-parent. So anyways, back to the situation is that people have all different situations. All I wanted to do, my happiest moment was picking my kids up. It was my routine. I picked my kids up. It was worse than what I had before, where I'd wake up to my children every day and put them to bed every night. That's what I wanted. That's my responsibility. That's what you don't get to. You settle down and you have children. And she said I was her soulmate in writing. So with all that deception, it still comes down to parental rights and responsibilities. We have rights and we have responsibilities. Our parental rights, meaning I have a right to decide everything about my children. And the contentious person, according to law, the parent that cannot co-parent, they lose their rights. They don't get to make the decisions anymore. It needs to be considered, the ability to co-parent. And so moving on and leaving your kids with their grandparents and flying around on vacations months after I leave and starting a new relationship 2 weeks after I leave, and then staying up all night texting him, and then, oh, by the way, I'm at the house with the key, because that's the way we arranged it, and then she puts a message on Facebook and blocks me from it, but then sends it to me months later, where it has hundreds of comments, likes, all our friends. I didn't see the comments. All our friends obviously talking about, like, just embarrassing me and humiliating me in front of everybody that I know, because I went to the same school as her. I've known her since she was 14. And so you have all that stuff, and everybody knows me, and now I can't see any of them. I can't talk to them. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I could go on and on, but the basic thing is that the courts are lying, they're breaking the law, they're committing fraud, and then the Supreme Court is hiding it by making the procedure so difficult, and by the way they administer the courts, and they administer the lawyers, and they all work together. As much so as in June 6th, they published that court would be shut down. You can go to meet with the Bar Association. So they all meet together and talk about how to lobby more power, how to get more money for lawyers. And so if they give you a free lawyer out of the state fund, they force you to get a lawyer, and then that lawyer is the lowest level lawyer possible. We're not supposed to do that. I have rights. It's in law. It's written in the rules, which are law. I have a right to a fair hearing and access to all the laws, whether or not I have a lawyer or not. But what they do specifically is target people who do not have lawyers and then just don't care. Now, if it's two parties that don't have a lawyer because they're poor or they just want to get it done, fine, no harm. Just don't cause any problems in my courtroom. But if there's someone with a lawyer, they can say whatever they want. They can break any rule. And if you bring it up, they make you recite every single law. And then even if you recite the laws, they don't care. But the lawyers, they don't recite any laws. And this is all on record. So I need a lawyer. I need a team of law firms. But when you reach out to a law firm, the first thing they say is, what do you do and what does she do? They're trying to see how much money you have. And the bigger firms, the ones that kind of make and shake this whole legal system, they don't do family law. They do big law. Or if they do some family law, it's the rich people. But rich people don't get divorced as much as poor people or middle class. Statistically, they don't. But when it does happen, and there's contention, there's actually a Supreme Court case that I put in my brief that they struck, gets up to the 6 figures. That's how much they spent on a divorce. 6 figures, and they're still in the Supreme Court. The wife or ex-wife was complaining, and they disclosed the actual amounts of the the attorney's fees. She was complaining about months extra of alimony. So she was getting 7 years almost, but she wasn't getting a full 7 years, and she wanted a full 7 years. Do you know how much a legal brief costs? Like $5,000, $10,000. I'm not a lawyer, by the way. This is not legal advice, but that's what it costs. It took weeks to do it. I didn't know what to do. You have to go through everything line by line. And all she did was say, oh, your brief's not good enough, no matter of law. Do you know why? To hide the fact. She saw the brief, by the way, because I submitted it. And then she objected to it and the motion to strike it because she doesn't want the truth getting out. The truth is that Heidi Ames lied in court, corrected herself. Well, lied a bunch of stuff, didn't correct herself. But what she did lie about is that it was a sliding glass door, which she said in court, and it's on transcript. And she corrected herself. And that there are 1,100 texts that he initiated or made. I'm not sure of the wording, written down. 1,100 texts he made here. And then she changed it in court and said, which is why I didn't object to it at the time, because they were just being ridiculous to me. I mean, every minute I would talk, when it was my turn to talk, she would interrupt me. Literally every minute and a half, literally. But anyways, she changed it. But then those lies got put onto the record, and then she let them stand through everything that I just explained before. She let it stand through ordering me to violate the domestic violence protocol. I brought it up to her. Then she used that against me, saying that I was extorting her. In writing, she said I was extorting her, and the court let that happen. And by the way, lawyers are required to treat the other party with respect. I, not being a lawyer, am not, but I was respectful. She complained because I called her fat after she berated me umpteen times. Get a lawyer, you're delusional. Oh, the court's the judge. She did this in writing, by the way, and was submitted to the court, and they just ignored it. But they got on the fact that I called her. They said, perhaps you should exercise a little bit more. You would be a better lawyer and more productive. Often being overweight, something like that, it affects your health. See how that feels? I wrote, see how that feels? Now, if you could please stop harassing me or making fun of me, whatever I said. But I said, see how that feels? I was using it as an example. She just didn't like what I said because I actually knew the way the law worked, and I knew all these things that she couldn't say. She was demanding that I can't talk to any of my friends or Erica's friends, America's friends, any of my friends that I grew up with since junior high, some elementary school. And these were people that we brought the kids to. And she kept me out of all that. She just started bringing the kids and leaving me alone, so that when I was out with them, I almost lost a kid. I did lose him. He came back when I brought him to fireworks. And then she would just go out with all her friends because they all had kids. She used me for breeding. She begged me to have children with her because she was afraid her clock was going to work out. This was a third engagement. I was her third engagement. Her other two previous engagements, one I have a police call from it because he got addicted to drugs, hit her, chipped her tooth, threatened me. I have the record of the police. And then before that, there was abuse too. But I didn't abuse her. And she never called domestic violence on that. She never even told her parents. She only did it because her and her police officer, Fling, wanted to be together and would not wait until it's appropriate. And I met him for 5 minutes and he walked away and he wouldn't explain why. I didn't want them to meet yet. And there was good reason. It was a lot for the kids. Didn't know if they were going to be together. They ended up breaking up a couple times at least. I don't know if they're together now, right? And then also I was living at a ghetto apartment. So all of a sudden, daddy's gone. Daddy's bad. Why is daddy bad? Why is mommy everything okay? I got more closet space. Oh, yay. Mommy's leaving everywhere. It's too much for kids that were 5 and 2 years old. It was too much for these children. 6 and 3 at some points. I mean, and it all happened because of COVID. So I still love her. I feel sorry for her. I feel like she's been taken advantage of by the courts. And when you let someone get away with a crime, I'm not saying lock her up forever, but it should be acknowledged that she committed a crime, and she commits crimes by fraud, but she's got taken advantage of her by a lawyer. Because what happens is when you file these cases, you have to file a financial affidavit, and then the lawyer sees how much money you have, and then they know what to do. And then they see how much money your family has, and they're like, well, I'm certain, for certain, especially knowing that you committed a crime before hiring me, that you're going to pay, and this is good money for me. And I can make a name being on the Women's Bar Association, which is not a bar association or associated with the bar. It is just a separate entity that works solely for women's rights, which the justices are members of. 2 of them are, 1 man, 1 woman, which is unconstitutional to bring any gender into any law. And the U.S. Supreme Court just recently, June 29th, I believe, Clarence Thomas, a black man, said and ruled that affirmative action is unconstitutional and it is rudderless for schools, to issue funds based on the color of one's skin. They should be rather judged by what they have bested, I think is the term. It was beautiful. And this is a black man that says this, because men, and from my experience, black people, which I've lived with, worked with, lived with them, by the way, and dated black women, no man, and I would assume no person, but that's not the case, wants to be pitied. I don't want to be pitied. I want to be respected for everything that I've accomplished in life and all the things that I've bested. And I'm trying to best this. I'm trying to just get through it. And I can't without the family courts doing their job and the judges doing their jobs, which means not breaking the law. And since all judges are employees of the state and the courts are state, the state has a duty to provide a fair court system. And but what they've done is they've made a law which holds them sovereign, which means you can't sue them unless a certain circumstance, which I believe there's actually this circumstance in my specific case and other people's cases, where they're acting outside the duty of the office, being malicious. And that's what these judges are doing. And I'm so scared that, okay, as I stand up to them, they continue to retaliate. And so again, remember in September, an hour, I just talked for an hour. In September, beginning of September, they're still going to try to get me into a hearing without any evidence, any discovery. Oh, there's interrogatories that she didn't answer. I filed them. Like, it's immense. And it makes me go crazy. So I was sitting in bed and I couldn't sleep, over and over again. Just, it felt good to talk about this. Hopefully I'll publish it, and hopefully it will do something, because I'm the real deal. My name's Robert Tanguay. I'm a good person. I'm the founder of Emissions Tax, published author, Incentives in the Environment, and the father of 2 amazing children, which I love so dearly. And I want a relationship with the mother of my children in a fair way. And the first way to make it fair is to get rid of all this fraud and correct that stuff. And the people who broke the law that were reported to the police need to be held accountable for that. And that includes judges. And then make things financially fair, because according to the law, forever we're connected as long as we have children. If I make more money, I have to give it to her. If she makes more money, she has to give it to me. And by the way, she purposely works part-time. And I am angry, because you would be too if someone lied about you and defamed you criminally. By the way, it's criminal defamation. Look it up. And lied to the courts and kept you from your children, which I was allowed to see at the police station. Come on now. So please, read New Hampshire Oliver Twist and reach out to me. Please help me out, because this can happen to you. And besides that, I have a lot to give to the world. And my children are being deprived of it, and I'm being deprived of the opportunity to grow and continue doing what I was doing. Running a business, New England marketing and efficiency. Everything I've worked for is just getting thrown down the tubes. But I won't give up, and I shouldn't have to submit. You do not have to submit to evil. You do not have to submit to lies and fraud. You don't have to do anything. But you shouldn't have to. And you shouldn't be forced, because that's not justice. And that is not competitive spirit of America, where we all compete fairly. And you don't pick on people who are down. You don't do that. I've never bullied anybody. You don't bully people. It's just a horrible, absolute horrible way to live. You never pick on someone. A true champion doesn't take off or tie one arm of the competitor. No, they put their arm behind their back because they're that good. And that inspires people. They're so good. Muhammad Ali, a true competitor, loved forever because of the spirit. And they're crushing that in me. They can't, though. I'm here, right? I don't know what I'm going to do. Court, I'm trying to an injunction. To who? File evidence? To what? God bless, guys. Like, seriously. If you're listening right now, if you're listening now, I hope that you do something about it. And I know if you're just a person, I know. But read New Hampshire Oliver Twist, share it. Talk to the government. So, Governor, tell him that Robert Tanguay deserves to be treated like a human being. Because that's really what it is. Is Robert Tanguay a human being? Does he have rights? Does he have constitutional rights? Do his children have constitutional rights? Then why aren't they being upheld? Why isn't due process being upheld? Why are things not fair? Because that's what it says in the courts. That's what the courts are supposed to do, is make them fair. And if you did something wrong and you admit to it, then you get forgiveness. And then it is not supposed to be a retaliatory punishment. It is supposed to be a punishment to correct the situation and fix you. Read it. It's the beginning of the criminal statutes. I've read them all. I don't have them all memorized. 633:4. Yes, I do. But the law makes sense. The law is good. The law is just. That's why we have this. Because we're no longer monkeys. We need to stop acting like it. Thank you so much.